Hey there, just want to talk for a few minutes about what I refer to as the focus area 2 for prioritization. And it's a process for prioritization. It's part of a blog that I'll put into the comments below. And it's a blog that talks about 4 focus areas for leader managers. And the first part of that conversation is how we often say there's a leader's role in this and a manager's role in this, but most of the time, most of us spend most of our time being leader managers. So focus area 2 for a leader manager is that they are able to make what the priorities are very clear so that teams can focus on achieving what they need to and that prioritize where change needs to occur. And what I've got is a formula for how you do that prioritization to make it crystal clear. So what do we prioritize? Well, there's a whole stack of research done by the Franklin Covey Institute, published in a book in the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And what they found was that when they did a study in the Western world of leaders and managers that were trying to achieve goals for change, what they found was that leaders and managers that they had, these are the numbers of goals here, the numbers of people that could actually achieve the goals for change, if you had 11 or 20 goals for change, you would achieve 0. That didn't mean that sometimes as leaders and managers fudge some numbers to show that they did get the number that they're looking for, the target, but to actually meaningful get that change, they actually got 0. If they had 4 to 10, they might have had a chance of getting 1 or 2, but if they had 2 or 3 goals that were about change during that time period, they had a pretty good chance of getting 2 or 3 of them and realizing that change over that period of time. So the point there is about having priorities and making sure that we don't have too many priorities where we diffuse our effort or we haven't got any focus. So how do we set this prioritization for change? And this is how I'll do it, which is using the PUMP methodology in performance measurement. So the first thing we want to do is prioritize an outcome. Then what we'll do is we'll select performance measures for that outcome so that we can figure out what the baseline of performance is. We can add targets to the prioritized performance measures where we're looking for change. Teams then can work on making progress towards those targets, and the measures will then give us feedback on the progress we're making towards the target that's attached to the outcome. If those actions don't make a difference, then we're going to have to go back to the drawing board, figure out what we've learned from attempting to put it in place, and redo it and go back through the cycle. Let's expand on this. So prioritizing the outcome is making sure that we have a set of outcomes in a cause and effect framework that allows us to understand the things that are important to our business. And for this particular organization, an outcome that was important to them was that they had forward plans that they stick to. That was an outcome that had a flow-on impact to these 2 outcomes, which really led to the core outcome they were trying to change and improve over time. But they started here because they had and understood this cause and effect flow through those results. Then what we did was we actually designed and selected performance measures for it. So we have the outcome here. We have the measures that are in place, and we make sure that our measures are a quantification of an attribute of that result over time. And that's how we write performance measures. So quantification gives us objective evidence about that performance result and how it's occurring over time. So the job of the performance measure is that it gives us feedback on the outcome we seek. So in this particular example, that's using the PUMP measure design technique, it's to design and select the measures for an outcome. Okay, so now that we've prioritized our outcome, we've got these meaningful measures in place. What do we do now? Well, let's get to know what the current baseline of performance is and then add a target to that. So there are a couple of types of performance measures. One is performance measures that don't have a target attached to them. And in this example, we can see this measure just tracking along. Looks like something unusual happened there, but the rest of it's all within the normal pattern. And then we have a measure where we've said, hey, there's a baseline of performance here, represented by this blue line, same as the blue line up here, which is referred to as the central line. But that's the baseline of performance. there's been a change. And that's where we've added a target to this particular measure. And there's two ways that we can set targets on our measures. We can set the target for change. In other words, we want this central line here to be 10 days by December. Or we can set a target where we're trying to maintain that standard of performance. And prioritization is about setting a change target. If we're trying to realize change, what we're trying to do is make it clear, here it is, and we're going to signal the priority that that is something we're trying to focus on. So now that we have prioritized a measure by putting a target on it for change, that means then that teams can work on making progress towards the targets. So we take the action learning cycle, the plan, do, check, and act cycle, and we can expand on that. When we understand what performance is doing by coming up with a baseline of performance, we then prioritize the gap in performance between where we are now and where we want to be in the future. And that's a target for change. We'll do some root cause analysis. We'll figure out a high leverage solution about what can improve that performance. We can implement it, and then we're checking it to make sure that we check using the measure to see the impact that has had on that baseline of performance. So we want to do shorter cycles. This isn't a 12-month thing. This is shorter cycles of performance improvement, maybe 60 days to 90 days. And it's also using this experimental mindset. What are these things that could impact that outcome and have an impact on that measure and get us closer to the outcome? We implement, we check in for impact, we learn something, and we go back through the cycle. And that's the formula for prioritizing. It's in those 6 steps. But let's have a look at an example. So a B2B organization, they had complaints about customer service and deliveries. Okay. They went to prioritize the outcome, customers value our service, and prioritize the performance measure for change, which was the average delivery time in days. And they measured that monthly. So this is their measure. Their baseline of performance was 32 days. Yes, this was a B2B organization. They made stuff for customers and put them on semi-trailers and then delivered it. Okay, 32 days as a baseline. But as you can see, the performance would vary, or the natural variation on this, which is within that blue range, could be anything up to 52 days. So they were getting complaints all the time because they were talking about, yes, on average, you should get your goods in 32 days, but half the time it wasn't 32 days. So what they did was they set a target. The leaders set a target that was a target of 10 days by December. Okay, the team then went down to that measure. They looked at the measure. They had a central line of 10 days. That was their target. They knew that their current baseline was 32 days. They then went through the process of saying, okay, we've got the target. We've now got to reduce the variation in the delivery process as well. They did some root cause analysis, developed a solution, put the root cause, the address of those root cause, implemented it, and then monitored the impact. From that, this is what happened. So a few months later, we can see there's a change. This was the current level of performance and the amount of the variation that they were getting, and also that baseline of performance. And they had now achieved this. Here's their target point. So now that they had had 8 measure values in a row, we could recalculate that central line. And we have now a new level of variation, which is in this blue band, and a new baseline. And that baseline of performance is nowhere near this. So we might say they failed the target, but they improved performance. What they had learned by the time they had got to this point was that to get to here, they would have to, one of the things was to implement a whole new system, which might take a few more days out of it. But the leaders believed that that wasn't a very good return on investment. So they decided to leave it the way it was after this improved level of performance. So they still continued to tell customers they could get the goods in about 32 days, which is pretty right. Most of the time, they would get their goods in 32 days. The difference was between here and there is that the reality was half the time they were getting it beyond the 32 days. Now, most of the time, it would be within that 32 days. And that was an acceptable level of performance for the business. So that is the formula for prioritization. We want to prioritize an outcome, make sure that we have performance measures for that outcome. We want to know then the current baseline of that performance, and then we can add targets to it, prioritizing where we want change in a particular area of performance that's in a performance measure. Teams then work on making progress towards those targets. It's not success or fail if we hit the target or not, because the target's really just a signal for something we want to be in the future. It may or may not be a good idea, but we want to get close to it. And what we want to get close to is closer to the outcome. And the measures then provide the feedback and give us progress reports of how the impact, if you like, of the work that we've been doing. Anyway, that's what I call the formula for prioritization. It's the second of the key things that I think leaders and managers should really be good at. And that is about setting priorities in a very clear way that is not about setting people up to fail because we set a stretch target, about hit or miss. It's progress towards the outcomes, progress towards the targets, and that we can learn from it. Anyway, I hope this has been of value, and thanks for watching.